Welcome to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast. Conversations with today's top ministry leaders to help you lead better every day. And now, podcasting from the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center in Chicagoland, here are your hosts, Ed Stetzer and Daniel Yang.
Welcome to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast, where we're helping Christian leaders navigate and lead through the cultural issues of our day. My name is Daniel Yang, the director of the Church Multiplication Institute, and we're glad to have back with us on the show J.D. Greear. J.D. is the pastor of Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Under his leadership, the Summit has grown from a church of 300 to more than 12,000. J.D. is the founder of J.D. Greear Ministries and hosts Summit Life, a daily 30-minute radio broadcast and weekly TV program. He's the author of several books, including his latest, Essential Christianity, The Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. But before we talk to JD, I want to remind you to leave us a review if you enjoy our interviews.
They don't do that. It really irritates me. Have I told you that I'm unhappy with that? They don't do that?
Existence.
Okay.
Let's hear from Ed Stetzer, editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine, the executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center.
Didn't we just have JD on? It's like, how many times can we have JD on? We just had him in the Great Communicator series, and he did a great job. And by the way, like tens of thousands of people listen to these, but they don't leave reviews. JD, do you have any friends that could leave a review? Anyway,
You could
leave a review. You could leave a review.
I could. You know what? I just want to say, I've never noticed this. I've been on this lots of times. Daniel has the perfect DJ voice.
Oh no, he's totally amazing.
There you go.
I'm just going to go review that and be like, I don't know about the Ed guy. And
Put that in the review.
Put that in the review. That'll be the review. That Daniel has an amazing DJ voice. I can have a DJ voice, but I have to put it on. All right. So here's the thing. So we are just coming out of the Super Bowl. Daniel, that's a big sports thing. Yeah.
Right.
like he doesn't know, but I don't know. So, and if things, we had those, he gets us ads, and I should say JD and I we serve in this theological advisory committee with He Gets Us. And so everybody's talking about it. I don't know at the time of this recording whether or not the article I'm writing in a major secular publication gets it in or not, because it's a little tricky to write about these things. So we'll see, but I've written lots about it. JD's written lots about it. We'll link all those in the show notes. So, so JD has a kind of a book, I think, perfectly timed. We're in the He Gets Us campaign is doing a lot of like on the air people, and this is just the Super Bowl kind of the beginning of this. But so you write this book, which I had the privilege of reading ahead of time, and I think I endorsed. Did I endorse your book? Am I on your book?
You did.
Okay, good. Good was good. I was glad I did. It's called Essential Christianity: The Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words, and so it's not a book geared towards like Daniel, me, whatever. Though you can read it, and I would encourage you to. But it's actually geared towards people who don't know Christ. But I thought it was fascinating that you wrote it based on the book of Romans. So talk to us about why that is, because that does create some additional challenges and opportunities there as well. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, let's just be clear. It's longer than 10 words. It's
right,
not
true.
But the 10 words are the logic points of the turning logic points of Paul's argument he lays out in the book of Romans. And that's how I thought, what is the most classic book ever written on the gospel? It's obviously the book of Romans. It's written for first century Romans. And the question was, if Paul had written it, those same logic points to 21st century Americans, what would it have sounded like? Now, let's acknowledge Paul's every word is inspired by the Holy Spirit. Mine's not, but it's using those universal questions that people ask in every age and saying those are still the questions that we're asking today. I had a privilege of having an unbelieving friend. She was a professor at one of our universities around here, and writes for a lot of secular things, and she just she was in the process of discovering the truth of the gospel, and so she kind of read it along with me as I kind of went chapter by chapter and said, read this, and she's one of the comments she made, and I actually put it in the book. She said, it is amazing how a document written 2,000 years ago still addresses the most fundamental questions that secular academics have today. The audience for the book you mentioned is definitely somebody that's not a believer, but I read Basic Christianity when I was in college. Basic Christianity by John R.W. Stott. And I remember then, and still to this day, I'm not totally sure who was that book for, like the motivated seeker, or was it for the young Christian?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Mere Christianity. Who doesn't read Mere Christianity and then give it to their non-Christian friends, but you also read it for your own Christian faith? Yeah,
that's right. And so that's what I hope this is.
And I know you sort of have to say that because you're trying to sell your book. I just wanted to say that in front of everybody. But I actually think that too. So I really enjoyed the book because one of the things I really liked is it would help me frame. And I really found it helpful how you framed some of the discussions of Christianity around key issues today. So 10 words, sure, but it's more like these are 10 I mean, they're almost like tying into significant questions about what you need to know. So if you love the beauty of the gospel, I think you'll love the book. And I think, here we are. I mean, it's kind of a mess today. Even like around this whole, like the whole he gets us thing. Like, what's the secret agenda? What's this? And so, how do we talk about Christianity today to a world that sees us increasingly as the bad guys in the current cultural milieu? And you talked about the secular academic. So help us think about that, because again, I would discourage people, give out the book, give away the book. I think that's super helpful. But gosh, it's just hard. It's not just you've lost your home field advantage. It's a sense that maybe we're the problem in the world. I'm the problem. It's me. So how do you address that and share the gospel?
Yeah, that's a great question, because in the first chapter, I lay out almost a positive case for deconstruction. Now it's brief. This is not
No, but I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, but it's saying that, and I don't want to overplay this, but in some sense, Paul was actually writing Romans, as part of a deconstruction project in one sense, because he's rebelling against some of the established religious hierarchies, in his case, the rabbinic, Judaism, also, Roman, the way the Romans thought about religion. And Paul is saying, hey, there's some good questions in here, but we got to strip away a lot of the religious paraphernalia and a lot of the power paraphernalia. And we've got to get back to who is God and what has he been saying? And so he starts with these universal questions, and he says, I'm going to deconstruct this and then get back to that universal question and like the relevance that they have. Like, how do we know there's a God? Where has he revealed himself? Here's a question I've never seen addressed, or at least haven't seen it addressed in a lot of apologetic type books, is if there really is a God, why don't more people believe in it? Paul answers that question right there in chapters 1 and 2. Then, what about religion? Won't religion fix the problem? So Paul debunks religion as to why it's broken. Then he gets to questions like, is it possible to know for sure that you're going to go to what does faith mean? If the Christianity is true, why is religion so hard? Why is Christianity in particular so hard? And he's taking that kernel, that core truth, that essential Christianity, and he's trying to separate it from a lot of the husk in his day of some toxic culture. And so I think we recognize, and this is a bigger discussion than we're in today, but we recognize that while deconstruction, we would say, is a mostly unhealthy movement, it starts with some really necessary, healthy questions.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with Christians asking themselves, what are they a part of? And I think maybe some of what you're getting at, JD, is are you seeing something about the evangelical church in the United States? And are we missing something? Is this part of the reason why you wrote this book? Because I get the sense that obviously you're writing for potentially skeptics and seekers, but there is that component where it sounds like you're also talking to those who are trying to stay convinced of whether they should stay in the church or leave the church. I mean, what are we missing here?
Yeah, no, that's exactly who I was thinking about, because what we're missing is that we've taken artificial constructs that go along with Christianity that a lot of times are as much about society and about and we've conflated those with the essential message of the gospel, so that minor things become central things. And not that minor things are not important, those questions, but there is a center that everything else is supposed to grow out of. We Protestants, and I'm a Protestant, we reacted in the 16th century against what we saw as this kind of like, artificial hierarchy built around the church. Well, it's a little bit ironic, but here we are in the 21st century. We have our own hierarchies that we have built around it. And when I say hierarchies, I'm probably using the wrong word there, because I'm not trying to talk through some of those questions of authority. I just mean we have constructs around that are very confusing when somebody from the outside looks in and says, is Christianity a set of morals to adopt? Is it a Is it a self-help program? Because most of the Christian books out there are about how to, become a better version of yourself. Is it a political platform? Because that's how the media thinks of it, as evangelical is synonymous with a platform. What is the beating core behind these things? Because that's what Paul was going for, because he knew that was going to be the dunamis, the word he used in Romans, that would ultimately not only transform a life, but transform a society.
Mm. Sometimes you hear people talk about belonging and then believing and then behaving, right? And all these three components are essential for somebody to maybe to be a Christian, or at least there's dynamics here. In your book, I don't get a sense that you're completely just taking a rational, apologetic approach to why one should believe. Can you talk about the interplay of why behaving and belonging and belief maybe have some interplay, and what are you trying to do in terms of the book to maybe leverage one or maybe all three of those?
Yeah, it's interesting. The book of Romans itself is written to deal with a societal, basically, crisis in the church at Rome, that Jews and Gentiles are really having difficulty getting along. And what Paul is trying to show them is, yes, the gospel is going to give you the internal machinery. It's going to give you the value set, the way to live that ultimately is going to bring that harmony that you are looking for. Along the way, dealing with the societal question, he pens the greatest treatise ever written on the glories of the gospel and where it comes from and what the eternal realities behind it are. That's very interesting to me, that in a fractured society, Paul is going to take that problem and use it with, and say that brings us to the gospel. Well, here we are now, and in the face of just all the strife that we experience on a near continual basis. You look at just, some of our the he gets us type of the message it's speaking into this a fractured society, and the way that we know something's not right, but no matter how many moments of holding hands and we're all together in this, that lasts for a moment, but then the next day we wake up and go right back to the way that we were. That the gospel that Paul prescribes to the Romans in the first century is the same gospel that transforms American society in the 21st century.
So full disclosure, I think people know I'm a big J.D. Greear fan. We're friends. I'm not generally a big fan of pastors who write books from their sermons, because it's just sometimes they all think they're Chuck Swindoll who can do that, and it's just amazing, and they're not, or Max Lucado can, and they're not. But what I really liked about this, well, first of all, is some of the focus, but the 10 words. So I would, if you wouldn't mind, I've got a question to follow up with that. Can you do the 10 words in your head? Do you have all 10 words? Can you get 7 of them? You're looking around for the book,
I am looking around for the book.
I'm trying to look online, but give me some. Let me do this. So I put you on the spot. Give me some of the words so we get kind of a feel, and then I'm going to come back to a couple of questions related to that.
Announcement's the first word, because Paul starts with "into the darkness God has spoken," and that Christianity is not good advice; it's good news. The second word is undeniable, because Paul is going to explain that what can be known about God is actually there, and the weakness is not in the evidence, it's in the disposition that you bring to it. I'm going to skip a word here and go to the word religion with it's crossed out, because religion is the universal human response to the gap that we feel between us and God. Let's jump to the word.
Dude, you can only remember 4 words, can't you? That's all you have is 4.
Exclusivity. That's one of the big crisis points.
Totally.
Is it possible to believe something and not become exclusive and arrogant and condescending? Paul deals with that. It's like he's talking to readers of the New York Times when he lays out why this doesn't lead to pride, it leads to humility, struggle. That's another one that I feel like is this unanswered question of people say, if Christianity is true, why is it so against, in some ways, what I naturally want to be like? So those are,
but I wanted you to lay this out, because I really wanted people to kind of get a feel for how it is. So it's not like, I guess again, I'm not at all being critical of Chuck Swindoll, but it's not kind of like a Chuck Swindoll sort of, I preach this sermon and then kind of weaves through the text. It's based on Romans, But the words really I find super helpful, and he gave a few of them there. Also, too, one of the things that we text, and we have mutual friends who text, and your inclusion of some of the issues around sexuality, to me makes a lot of sense, because this is one of the big questions that people have in our day, and it's an apologetic question. It's a question that has to be addressed. But for other people, it's like, well, if you're doing these 10 essential words, what are these asides that are there as well, and why are those included?
Yeah, so there's 3 interludes total. One and they're all a little bit assumed in Romans, and Paul doesn't devote as much space as he does to the main argument. The 3 are who actually is Jesus. Paul declares him to be the Son of God in power. What does that actually mean? And if Paul were in person, he would unpack a little bit. So we talk about what is the Trinity, and who is Jesus as the Word of God. How do we know it's true is the second interlude, because Paul is going to put a lot of that on the resurrection. His classic explanation of the resurrection or defense of it is 1 Corinthians 15. So we just weave a little bit of that in there of why is the resurrection so important. The third one, the one that you just alluded to there, is the question of sexuality, because Paul in the book of Romans, when he's talking about the result of the fall, talks about all kinds of our both our person as well as our relationships that are corrupted by the fall. And one of the ones he touches on is sexual brokenness. One of the things we all have in common as fallen people is that we're broken sexually. That brokenness manifests itself in different ways. But it's just that's at the core of who we are. And Paul says this is where you're going to see some of the effects of sin. And so realizing that in kind of, society, this is one of the big kind of objection points for Christianity is look, aren't you espousing an archaic sexual ethic? Yeah. In the 90s, it was sort of don't ask, don't tell. People come in and they, as long as you won't talk about it, I won't talk about it. It won't be awkward. Every college student, young professional that comes to our church comes in with an assumption about what we believe and an assumption about how we believe it.
Right.
And if I don't get ahead of that, it's a non-starter. It's what Tim Keller calls a defeater. They won't even consider anything else I'm saying because of this. So I know that I've got to reset the terms and say, here's what the Bible actually teaches and how Christians approach it.
No, I think because again, I know we were part of a conversation that was people were pushing back on that. I think it was the right choice. I don't think you can in 2023 you can have conversations that we're part of this Christian movement and not answering the biggest objections to the Christian movement that are in people's hearts and minds. So I think it's good. But that being said, what do you see are some of the biggest obstacles that people that are preventing people, and again, we've seen some of we're recording this before the Super Bowl, just full disclosure. So, but I know stuff's going to blow up, and I know we're kind of expecting it. Also, millions of people are going to, for the first time maybe in their life, read stuff about Jesus, and I love it. And I hope they go to the Bible reading plans that he gets us and explore who he is. So, but at the same time, not everyone's going to be happy. It's already been some of that. So, and so not just about ads, but what are the biggest obstacles preventing people today from considering and embracing the Christian faith? What do you think?
Yeah, two things come to mind. I'm sure there are more thoughtful answers than this, but one of them is an assumption that goes back to Immanuel Kant that Francis Schaeffer talked about, which is that the truths of religion, the truths of Christianity are a subjective preference, not an objective reality. Schaeffer famously talked about his upper story and lower story. Lower story is, it's just what you prefer. And people tend to think of religion in that category as something that works for you. Paul and all the New Testament writers are saying these things are actually true. There actually was a dead man in a grave who got out of that grave, and that transforms everything. So that would be one, I think, major obstacle. A second is what we talked about earlier, is that there's all this construct that has been built around and associated with Christianity and with the gospel itself. And some of that is unfair. Some of it has been thrust upon us by people who don't take time to actually see who we are and what we believe. Some of it is self-deserved. There are some times that, Ed, you and I both know, are very familiar with Christians who are going to, they're going to say that Jesus is more important in politics, but when the rubber meets the road, it's political alignment that is ultimately the key unifier. And so I think, there's a lot of kind of a tangled mess that people have to weave through to say, okay, who is Jesus, and what is he actually saying to me, and what is he offering to me, and is this one among many religious preferences that I can try on, or is Jesus who he says he is, which is the one Lord, the creator of the universe, who died for my sin and rose from the dead.
JD, I want to come back to something that you mentioned, and this is around college students coming into, let's say, a church like Summit or any one of the churches that our listeners are leading, and they are already coming with preconceived notions about how they want to hear certain subjects talked about. But I want to speak specifically about, or I want to address specifically those who grew up in church, and so they have the culture of Christianity and the church culture of church going. They may not have the content as much. Now, I can purchase a bunch of your books and give it to them, but provide some coaching. Like, how can we come alongside those who are used to Christian culture, and maybe they're in a season where they're kind of turned off by Christian culture, but they haven't really engaged Christian content, the content of the gospel. They wouldn't know Romans deeply. Reading your book can be helpful with that. But if I'm pastoring, 20-somethings coming to my church, and this is their background, I mean, it's a mission field, right? What are some coaching points that you can give to listeners that find themselves in this situation?
Yeah, well, let's start with the language you used there, Daniel. I've loved, and Ed and I've talked about this before. I love Michael Green's distinction of what he calls the missionary and the defender of orthodoxy.
I love it.
And he says in the first century, you had missionaries and defenders of orthodoxy. They exist side by side in the church, and the church needs both of them. A defender of orthodoxy is trying to show how distinct the Christian message is from the world. He is confronting error. He or she is confronting error. A missionary is trying to bridge the gap and trying to show how the questions the culture is answering, well, Christianity is actually answering those. And what Michael Green shows is that the two are complementary gifts. They start at different places and they're angled different ways, but they should never contradict. And in a healthy spiritual environment, they're going to actually mutually reinforce each other and support each other. We have a blogosphere culture, especially in evangelical Christianity, that loves the defenders of orthodoxy. And, we have some who are just like all missionary, and they think there's no role of kind of like contending for these core things of the faith. We really need both. Lovelace, Richard Lovelace used to have this analogy. He compared it to red blood cells and white blood cells in a body. If you have too many white blood cells, you die. I can't remember the name of the disease. You have too many red blood cells, that's leukemia. Well, you also die. He says you got to have the right balance of both. Well, you got to have in a church, you got to have red blood cells. Think of that as your missionary evangelistic zeal. You've also got to have the right amount of white blood cells, which are defending orthodoxy, and only then are you going to be healthy. I think pastors tend to lean toward one of those two, and we really have to take both because both are our assignment. I'm a guarder of doctrine that was committed once for all to the saints. And I'm, for 2 Timothy, guard your faith and your doctrine. But I'm also there to be seeking and saving the lost. And that means going out of my way to make this message understandable, perceptible, and remove the obstacles for those that are the farthest from God.
Yeah, good. We're actually, you probably guessed this, that when you have two hosts, we were sending each other notes, and I really like that. That's good. That's insightful and helpful. Talk to me a little bit about how you would, you're in the research triangle. People don't know that from, it's not as common. It's not as famous as it used to be. It's kind of like people like, I remember in the 2000, the research triangle, I guess, but it's just displays a lot of secular people. People hear you're in North Carolina and they think, you're in a rural part of the Bible Belt. You're not. I think the percentage of PhDs per capita is higher than anywhere else in the, highest in the nation. So you get some skeptical people. And so how do you explain the gospel to somebody with no Christian background, no Christian vocabulary? Let's start with that. And then I want to ask some follow-ups with that. So how do you do that to them? Now, again, you're still preaching, but you're still having these conversations. And so how do you have those conversations? How do you train others to have those conversations?
Yeah, obviously you can't preach the book of Romans every year, but that was probably
if you could.
the reason that I found the most people that were really in that category you just described that really felt like I was answering the questions that they were asking. For those kinds of people, merely showing Jesus as, the way to have a balanced life and a good family and to be a good leader and to be, fulfilled. That just is not, they're asking deeper questions. And, it's like, I kind of tell them, tongue in cheek, it's like, I'm not asking you to drink a couple of, glasses of crazy milk. I need you to buy the whole crazy cow. And here's why. Here's why that's reasonable. It's like Daniel in the book of Daniel. He's not trying to spur on Nebuchadnezzar and the wise men to better behavior. He's trying to say the whole basis of how you think about the world is wrong. And here is what there's a God from heaven who is speaking. So I just I want to engage it straight on and to say that, yes, I'm a missionary. It's like when I lived overseas among Muslims. You were just saying you've got to make some choices about what really, where is authority? What is the role of what is prophecy showing us about these things? And so, that person I talked about at the beginning who had the privilege of, reading this book alongside me, she became a Christian through the not just of reading the book, a lot of different things, but this was part of it, is just dealing with these questions head on. And she even said to me, she said, I feel like when you don't take this stuff for granted and you will put it in terms accessible for somebody like me, there's a lot of us out there who want to actually hear what is the reasonableness for this thing that's a pillar of Western society. Is there any reasonableness for it? Show us that there is.
So JD, let me follow up. What if the issue is not a content issue? What if somebody's, they know the gospel and they've lived it, let's say, most of their life, but they've had painful church experiences? How does the gospel help somebody who's come from a painful church background?
Yeah, pastorally, that's probably the most difficult situation for me to deal with, because it's like they've already been across that bridge and it's been burned, and so I'm not leading them to something new. I'm trying to lead them back to something that has been messed up. Certainly you've got, plenty of New Testament evidence of the apostles and Jesus ministering to people like that. Ultimately, Jesus said they would know us by our love. And I think that in a truly gospel community, you're just going to see a kind of love and forgiveness and tenderness and acceptance that thaws the ice that forms around a heart that has been hurt. And I routinely tell people, I'm like, there's literally no shortcut to that. There's not a magic bullet. There's not a secret answer. There's not a Easter service. There's not a special song that's going to change all that. It's caring enough about somebody to let the ice thaw through a continual sort of like radiation of love toward them, and knowing when to have those key conversations where you say, hey, this happened and this was wrong, and this was the error. Here is the truth. I talked to a young professional on Sunday who was asking this exact question that you're asking. And I said, don't beat them over the head continually. You don't always be working every conversation to back to this, but look for a few times, like maybe once every 6 months. And then you sit down with them and you explain again these things. And then you go for 6 months, just loving them and praying for them, because that's how the Holy Spirit melts the ice around their heart. Yeah,
it is interesting how the, both relationship and content that points to the plausibility of the gospel are going to be key parts of that. I think sometimes we read this book. Well, no, it's also something that comes from you. And but again, let's come back to it's Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words is the book. J.D. Greear's course.
Can I have one thing? I just feel moved to say this, and I'll make this really quick. Please. I've learned this as a dad. My kids, it's not a lack of explanation. It really is like the Lord. He humbles me to say, I'm the only one that produces spiritual fruit. And I've got to teach it to him. I've got to model it before him. But ultimately, I'm a farmer, not a mechanic. A mechanic, is you hear a rattle in the engine, you pull the car over, you tighten it up, and it stops rattling. A farmer plants a seed, and then if the seed's not growing, the worst thing you can do is dig up the seed. It's at that point between the seed and the soil. And that's what we're doing is we're putting that seed there and saying, God, you're the only one that gives the increase. So sorry to cut you off, but
no, it's all good. It's all good. You've cut me off lots of time in the course of our long friendship, so I get it.
They're usually deserved, and the audience is grateful. The audience is usually grateful when I do.
That's right. That's right. They send me letters that mention how grateful they are for that. For those of you who don't know, JD and I have been friends a long time. Sometimes, what happens is sometimes you joke like this. Sometimes, like I was at Moody Church, and the executive pastor and I are really good friends, and we'd make jokes, and people would be like, "Oh, are you guys mad at each other?" We're like, no, we literally go out to dinner like regularly with our wives and everything. Anyway, it's sort of fun.
Ed led my parents to Christ when I was a newborn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I taught him everything he knows. Not everything I know, but I taught him everything he knows. But anyway, poor Daniel is just thinking, what in the world is going on? So, all right, so let's continue. So what is your encouragement to? Because again, we're going to have these conversations, we're going to have these resources, but you make some pretty big claims in the book, which I think is really good. Because I think we need to make big claims. I think your comment about not just drinking the crazy milk but buying the cow is so good. But you make the claim that Christianity is more inclusive than other worldviews, which I think is a really significant claim. But I want you to explain it a little bit, because I think it's sort of, remind people of what the word is, and it kind of points people to kind of how you frame a lot of these things in the book.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was in college, the classic, everybody's heard this, some version of this parable, the three blind men that fall into the fall into the pit with the elephant. They all reach out to figure out what's down there in the pit with them. And one grabs a tusk and says it's a gigantic spear. One grabs a leg and says it's a big tree. One grabs the tail and says it's a broom. And the moral of the story is all three needed to humbly listen to each other and not think that they had the exclusive view of truth. Leslie Newbigin, who was a missionary in India, he actually talked about that parable comes from India. And he said, the one person in the entire story who sees the whole elephant is the narrator. The narrator knows that each of the three blind men are only seeing a part because he or she sees the whole elephant. And he said, that's kind of arrogant to claim for yourself the one thing you deny to everybody else. It's pretty arrogant to say you see and everybody else is blind. Well, in our day, people say, well, the kind of the one universal thing that we believe is that all religions contribute, all morality is good. But the only way you can say that is if you yourself see the very thing you're denying to other people. So the idea that there are certain views that are exclusive and certain views that are not it's logically inconsistent, and it folds in on itself. The other part of that is I've never met somebody who no matter how inclusive they said they were, didn't have a who's in and who's out list. Let's just take I don't mean to stereotype here, but take somebody on the far left who is, just doesn't believe in God at all. They have a very clear understanding of who is a good person. And it doesn't include people who, throw plastic straws, into the intercoastal waterway, or people that are part of the NRA, or, there's a very clear group, so you just kind of acknowledge any truth claim is going to be, by definition, it's going to be exclusive. That's just there's no way around that. Well, Christianity actually says, the gospel actually takes that kind of idea and says, you're included not because you're smarter, not because you're better, not because of anything about you, but because of a gift that was offered to you. And instead of garnering the pride that goes with other types of exclusive claims, which is, I'm in, you're out because I got the degree, you didn't, I'm smart, I recycle, whatever it is you put in that, it says, I am accepted through nothing about me, but because of a God who gave a gift and revealed himself to me. Therefore, and again, borrowing a little bit of the language of Tim Keller here, therefore, Christianity is exclusive like every other worldview, but it's the most inclusive exclusivity the world's ever seen. And it creates the most inclusive community where it's really believed and where it's really preached. Wherever you see the gospel preached historically in the New Testament throughout history, it's going to create bodies of people that come from different backgrounds. They have different skin colors, they're different ages, different socioeconomic strata, but they come together because the gift and the unity that they have received in Christ, and that's a key word, received. The unity they've received in Christ outweighs the differences they bring into the community and destroys the pride that has previously separated them.
Fascinating. And of course, I would say I agree. It seems that, I live in Chicagoland. I guess I live in California now, but for a few months, and you live in a very more progressive part of North Carolina. It does seem that people have sort of, that religious faith and practice now is increasingly correlated, not one-to-one correlation, but is correlated to, being more politically conservative, being more culturally conservative, and there are exceptions. This correlation does not mean 100%. It doesn't mean causation. And when you look, you mentioned earlier people on the left, they would tend to be, with the African Americans being the more substantial exception, but they would tend to be less religious. Matter of fact, this is sometimes called the God gap. People write on this, and so this is not a controversial subject. So people shouldn't get mad at me about saying this. Math doesn't care about your feelings. This is just a factual reality. So if that's the case, you are, perceived in a conservative space with all the cultural trappings and things that maybe people on the more left side don't like. So how do I share about Jesus? And again, maybe because I'm just seeing some of this and the He Gets Us stuff. How do I share about Jesus to an irreligious world that's going to be more progressive, more left-leaning, from what is predominantly, though not exclusively, I'm using all the caveat words, but you get what I'm saying, from a religious world that's more, tends to also track with more conservative issues. How do we bridge that gap for gospel purposes?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd want to do, again, trying to think like a missionary, is many progressive are progressive for moral reasons. They bring a concern about the poor, and they bring a concern about equality, and they bring concerns about oppressive power structures that are legitimate concerns. I'm not saying all their solutions are right. I'm saying they are at least legitimate questions. I want to affirm that. And I want to say that Jesus-loving people would care about the same things, and shame on the church and members of the church where they haven't cared about that and affirmed that. That'd be the first way that I try to bridge the gap. The second way is I really do want to distinguish between primary and secondary issues. I have my own political answers to some of those, but I try never, as a pastor, I never talk about those secondary questions from the pulpit, because how I think we're going to solve the problem of poverty and healthcare and global warming. Those questions they're important, but they're not the essential question. And I want to have a church. In fact, I just had a conversation on Sunday with somebody who really believes, that a very active, big government, more, let's say, socialist leaning government, that's just going to be best for the poor. You know what? Whether I agree with that or not, I go ahead and say that's not the way that I'm going to lean in that discussion, but that's a perfectly fine a way for somebody to come as they work out some of those secondary questions. And that's part of the beauty of the gospel, is there can be a unity even when there is a range of opinion on some of the secondary questions. So I would just say being able to distinguish between what's primary and essential, what is secondary, even tertiary. The third thing is, and I'll just say this to other believers, we're not doing ourselves any favor by trying to back down on what is controversial in the Bible, when the Bible clearly teaches it, whether it's the value of life, the sanctity of sexuality and gender. These are things that are supposed to set us apart. And yes, sometimes we're villainized for them, but they also become the means by which God radiates the beauty of His shalom, His creation. And we make a big mistake when we try to mute what the Bible clearly teaches in order to make our message more palatable to our society. It doesn't mean I talk about everything equally all the time. As a missionary, I'm trying to think about what the right thing to say is, but Jesus was full of grace and truth. And Christians tend to gravitate toward one or the other. Truth without grace, that's a fundamentalist. Grace without truth, that's a liberal. The role of the Jesus follower is to be more truthful than the fundamentalist and more gracious than the liberal. Because grace and truth together, John says, that's the light that the darkness cannot overcome. And that's what we've got to be.
Fascinating and helpful conversation. And I just want to affirm the book to you. We have a lot of people on, and a lot of people, JD doesn't just come on when he has a book, because we have this great, you really should listen to, and we'll link in the show notes, you really should listen to the thing in the Great Communicator series that he was a part of, and the other 9 people in the series as well. It was really helpful, but I'm thankful for the book. And again, there's a reason I endorsed it. I want people to pick it up. It's called Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. And part of the fun is the person he's talking about, I actually happen to also know, who's, come to faith in Christ, and to see people, and to see so many people come to faith in Christ. So it's not just a hypothetical, hey, people need Jesus, but the church and JD are deeply involved in it as well. You may have noticed that we didn't have any more questions from Daniel Yang. So what happened? He got tired of the conversation, dropped off the conversation. No, that's not true. What happened is we lost the internet at Wheaton College. So I'm not there. I'm in California, and it appears we got to pay our bills more at Wheaton College. So Daniel's texted us, and he says
it's the balloon.
It's the balloon. It's the Chinese spy balloon. But I think, is there another? I don't think that's a few weeks ago by the time this is released, but it could have been. It could have been. So they're blocking the internet, the interwebs. Anyway, we've been talking to JD Greear. Be sure to check out Essential Christianity, the Heart of the Gospel in 10 Words. You can learn more about JD Greear at ChurchLeaders.com, but there's extra vowels in that name. It's JDGREE. ar.com. Hey, thanks for listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast. You can find more interviews of the ministry leaders, again, all at ChurchLeaders.com podcast. And again, I sound a little whiny just because I know like so many of you listen to the podcast, but you're not leaving reviews. So I'm not going to, I might wait a few more weeks. We'll see. But JD is going to leave a review about how awesome Andy and Daniel Yang's voice is, and we'll go from there. Thanks everybody for listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast.
You've been listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast. For more great interviews, as well as articles, videos, and free resources, visit our website at ChurchLeaders.com. Thanks for listening.